Hey guys, and welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. In today's episode, I'm just going to be talking a little bit about single mothers. I am a single mother. I never thought I would become a single mother. And there was a part of me that just kind of, because I was divorced, I just didn't really want the stigma of single mother, because I just feel like with the stigma of single mother, or identifying as a single mother rather, it just comes with all of these really negative connotations that I am happy to reject, right? As you know, I'm pretty, independent in my thinking and my philosophy, so I don't really get down with much of what people say and how we categorize women based on their circumstances, or people for that matter based on their circumstances. And so I just kind of wanted to get on here and kind of share my philosophy with some of the mothers out there, because I think, as a Black woman specifically, if you don't have the tools, right? And that's why I'm here to educate and to share my perspectives and the things that have helped me and, encourage you guys, because I just think that so many of us don't have the tools and we don't have the knowledge to really rectify our thinking, so that we don't carry a sense of shame, or project rather a sense of shame onto our children, which inadvertently communicates to our children, hey, you're unwanted, you're not worthy, you don't deserve to be here, you don't deserve nothing, or you're broken and you can't go on and be X, Y, and Z, or you were born with a deficit, right? So you are without because of X, Y, and Z, right? Because of the choices of another person, whatever the case may be. So first and foremost, I think something I always start these type of conversations with, and something that, is consistent, within my mind, right, at the forefront, especially when we start talking about Black men and relational dynamics, is that we have to acknowledge that communally and culturally, it is it's a normal behavior for Black men to trick Black women, to use Black women, to abuse Black women, to deceive Black women into getting the things that they want, whether it is sexually, whether it's financially, whatever the case may be, right? We know that this is just a dynamic that is very prevalent. There are very little consequences for the violence that is enacted on the emotional, physical, or psychological, spiritual even, right? Spiritual, physical, psychological, and emotional well-being of Black women. Right. There's no repercussions for this. Unfortunately, you can't take someone to court for being manipulative and conniving and all these different things. You just grow, you get better, you learn, you get wiser. But oftentimes that wisdom, in order to unlock that level of wisdom, typically comes from being deceived, right, and venturing down that path. And so when you hear conversations about Black women really prioritizing economics, what we're really saying is like, hey, listen, there's something about a person from a different socioeconomic background, and there are certain behaviors that comes with that, right? Now, we obviously know that money does not make a man, right? We know that doesn't make someone, have character and things like that. But typically, generally speaking, persons who are of a lower socioeconomic background do come with a level of liability. There is a difference in the psychology, right? From an evolution standpoint, these persons are in survival mode, right? So there's very little empathy, very little compassion, very little self-actualization in the range of emotions that these persons feel, project, and share with other people, right? And so for a lot of people who are manipulative, they do what they got to do to get by. You know what I mean? That's just who they are. And that is something that you are going to find amongst those who are of a lower socioeconomic and educational background, right? So it's so much more than that. It's so much more than, Black allyship. It's so much more than advocacy. What we're really saying is like, hey, listen, when you're hanging around with certain type of people, that comes at a price. You know what I mean? These type of people will surely help you lose everything, And so when Black women rise up and say, hey, listen, no more are we going to be at the brunt of this. No more are we going to use our shoulders to allow Black men to appear taller in society, right? Then oftentimes there's the stigma, there's the shame, right? Because just continuously, and I think for a lot of people, the expectation is that Black women be the mothers of American society, right? That Black women come in and nurture and be the one who can see, and I'm grateful because I think that overall Black women are waking up. I think the self-love movements and the representation and all the things, this cultural awareness, the societal awareness of our presence, of our beauty has really has really shaped the lives of a lot of Black women. So I do think that a lot of Black women are rising with greater sense of esteem and confidence within themselves, right? I talked about this as I'm reading Rock My Soul by Bell Hooks. She talks about the self-esteem within Black people. And she just was talking about how, in the 70s and the 50s and the 60s and so forth, education for African Americans was always the gateway to, self-fulfillment. It was always the gateway to, productivity within our society, right? Being able to acquire a certain type of job, being able to, feel confident within oneself, being able to acquire skills, all of these different things. But, obviously we know that has shifted, right? We know that we, generally we have negative attitudes towards education. And so, when people don't know better, they don't do better, right? And that's what I'm going to be talking about today in regards to motherhood. Now, for me personally, I live in my own world, right? I live in my own world predominantly because I'm in a urban community, right? As most Black people are within urban communities, right? Not always, right? But if you're starting from, you're getting yourself together, you're advancing, et cetera, as most of us are in these urban communities, right? This underdevelopment, okay? And for a lot of people, it's a matter of survival, right? As I talked about the characteristics that you'll find within these persons who are, really these communities that are underserved, meaning, not just, materially, but even just like psychologically and socially, right? How we relate to one another, how we see one another, right? We see one another as opportunities, right? These are persons who kind of relate by using one another through opportunistic means, you know what I mean? And so, being in this community, a lot of the persons here are impoverished in the mind, right? In the mind as well as materially. And so, and I can honestly say this too, like it really wasn't until I started making certain strides in my own life that I no longer ran into contact with these people. That's why I do believe in like self-evolution, and I do believe in investing in yourself, because it's true. You meet people for a season, and the right persons will eventually meet you along the way, as long as you continue to press on and press forward. That's why I do not believe in stagnation, right? I'm never in the same space that anybody has ever left me. I'm constantly focusing on growing and developing and all these different things, because your life will just be better for it. You'll meet different people along the way. Your perspectives will change. You'll be healed. You'll be happy. You'll be thriving. And you'll most importantly be around a group of people and individuals who are healthy and who can contribute the good, right? Sometimes when you're coming from the back of the line, right, within these communities, you're running into people who need something from you, right? And not just materially, but, these are persons who are spiritually deprived. These are persons who are psychologically deprived, and a lot of times, I know we advocate, and I think this is the thing when I say advocacy needs a reform, right? Is because, a lot of times it is due to choices. If I'm being honest, it's due to choices. A lot of people do have an opportunity out, right? And for a lot of us, if we're just being honest, it's education. But people don't take it, right? People don't take it for a multitude of reasons, right? And at that point, it could be circumstantial. This is where we can have the advocacy, we can have the compassion, right? I would even argue that sometimes it's, a knowledge-based thing, right? I talked about the Pell Grant, how you can get the Pell Grant if you're from a lower income level, and Pell Grants are free. It's money you don't have to pay back. You get up to $7,000 per semester, depending on the school you're going to. That's a lot of money. Most semesters are about $5,000, $6,000, and that's full time, right? So essentially, that's kind of like saying, hey, yeah, the Pell Grant is free, and that's available every semester. And so there's a lack of knowledge on how to really go about bettering oneself and entering into the institutions and all these different things, but it is not anything that is withheld. It's definitely something you kind of have to seek after. And a lot of times we don't come to that place until, unfortunately, we've made the mistakes, which is inevitable. As women, it's inevitable. You're coming from the back of the line, right? You're heterosexual. You're meeting a lot of different men, you know what I mean, of this background, of this caliber, right? You like Black guys, so that's just kind of like your demographic of choice, right? Your preference. And so if the psychology that permeates the vast majority of African American males is one in which, hey, take as many down as you can, right? Use these women to fulfill your own inept, right, self-esteem. You know what I mean? Use these women to go about acquiring a greater socioeconomic status for yourself, right? Like, then overwhelmingly, right? Overwhelmingly, the women who are seeking partnership and family and things like that, the numbers are disproportionate. So, quite inevitably, you are going to find yourself in situations where you do ultimately end up being a single mother, right? The cards are simply stacked against you. And this is very interesting because I would actually argue that it's a bit of an epidemic in our community. Not we, but yeah, I would say males, males have an awareness, Black men have an awareness that this is barbershop talk and it starts at the age of 6, right? They talk about how they go to the barbershop and they're taught how to flip and toss and discard and use as many of us as they can take down. You know what I mean? And so we've normalized this to kind of just say, hey, that's the game, like it or love it. It is what it is. But we've never really looked at this from an evolution, psychology, from the evolution psychology type of perspective, to say, why are Black people not advancing, right? And you can kind of look at the leaders in our community, i.e. Black males, and it's this psychology that permeates, that keeps many of us hindered. But it's so normalized today, right? Bell Hooks talked about this again in her book, Salvation. That one I did read. And she just kind of spoke about how, Black men were not taking care of their children. And I guess you could say that probably was in the maybe like the 60s, 50s. That's when it started to kind of become a little bit more normalized. We get this sense of freedom. 70s, 80s. I'm not really sure the era where she said that this was something that had become normalized, right? But she spoke about how, Black men weren't taking care of their children, but no one in the community was bringing about a sense of shame for this type of behavior, right? This irresponsible behavior. There was no shame. They were often able to go out and partner again. They were often able to hang out with friends or be in the community, and no one said anything to them about their negligence of their familial household, right? And the familiar structures. And so, what you have is this persistent coddling. And I know I spoke with one of the, perhaps maybe it was a subscriber, but I know there was a young man on here, and we had a conversation about, Black women coddling Black men. And he argued that that was not true, I've heard people, especially when it comes to Black women and our issues and the things that we seek to address. And, I heard someone say that talking to Black men was almost like talking to white women about their racism or something. And it was funny because it's true in the sense that there is this impeding sense of narcissism and this inability to see outside of oneself, and whether or not you are, showing up with these actions, to portray yourself as something, or you just can't see you can't see beyond yourself, and I do believe that's what makes a lot of these conversations, counterproductive, and so, as Black women, you live and you learn, you move on. And I wanted to just kind of give a little bit of that context before I get into my own philosophies and the things that keep me grounded and happy, and most importantly, joyful and grateful to be a mother. Because I think it's important for Black women to ease up on being hard on themselves, right? We know you come online, you got the internet bullies, you got the trolls, you got people who just bullies, right? You got everyone online has lived the perfect life. Everyone online has made the right decision at the right time. They've taken advantage of the right opportunities at the right time. You can't tell anybody online anything, quite frankly. People online, certainly have this attitude of I did it all the right way. My life is perfect. So they come online, they bully you, right? When you share certain things and mishaps and whatever. So anyway, I just think it's important to give context. And I think it's important for Black women to acknowledge that the cards are stacked against you, especially if you seek to partner with a Black male, right? Because, again, from a evolution psychology perspective, and it's really evolutionary psychological perspective. But evolution psychology is a relatively new field of study, right? And it really studies how humans think. And what we know is that so far we haven't really progressed in that area. But I haven't done a lot of research there, so I won't go further. But I will say that I think something that we can kind of look at when you look at a communal cultural sense, when you talk about Black persons and Black people, and you talk about the wealth of Black Americans being zero, right? When we make the most money in entertainment, I would argue, and maybe not the most compared to our white counterparts, but I mean, we're definitely hitting on some numbers. I mean, you think back on every Black athlete, and even outside of that, I mean, that's really kind of where the wealth would be coming from. And I guess, we can't lean entirely and say, hey, this is due to a lack of evolutionary psychology based on Black males and their inability to partner and to respect women or whatever from a spiritual perspective. Or no, we can't really go that far. I don't want to go that far off the deep end, but I will say that, I think there are a lot of factors that actually kind of go into why our cumulative wealth will be zero in the next few years. I don't even think it was 2030. I think it was like, it was a little bit further out. And I don't even know if that was even something real, right? I didn't do that research myself. So let's not veer too far to the left. So being in my own world, right? First and foremost, it is the work of healing, right? You have to venture through the emotions, venture through those hard parts of you and start to kind of shave some of that off, right? And I think that's the perfect analogy. Like, for so many of us, we have to bury so much inside, and so much of what we bury is manifesting in our external, right? It manifests as this hard, rough ruggedness, it manifests as this need to defend ourselves and this inability to feel safe within our bodies. So you have to really do that deep work. And I know people are wondering, like, what does that work look like? First and foremost, just know that it's a long process. I would actually argue that I don't think it's something that is lifelong, as I think, self-reflection is lifelong. You have more experiences, you learn, you grow. But I think there comes a point in time where you do your work, and I think God does the rest. You know what I mean? At least that's what's true for me in my life. Like, I've done so much work on myself. My early 20s, I started pretty early, doing that work of self-reflection. And it started with just simple questions. Why do I do this, right? I'm in relational dynamics. I'm not getting the results that I want. I'm like, how am I showing up? What is this? And the insecurity in itself that we feel as Black women from being told that we're ugly or, we're nerdy, right? Y'all know Black nerds stand up. Okay. Y'all know how it is. Being told that, we're not enough. And like I said, we know that just generally Black women are really pigeonholed into hypersexuality. So not being this overtly voluptuous and promiscuous Black girl that is heavily coveted, it's a lot. It's a whole journey back to self, to figure out, like, who am I as a person? And so, it starts there. And I think just, going through those experiences that you've buried down, the things that you're acting out of, right? For example, sometimes we do things, I would actually argue, until we're healed and whole within ourselves, we do a lot of things based off of where we're aching, you know what I mean? So we may pursue a field or be in this dominant field or whatever the case may be. And it's not because it's something we want to do, but it's because it's something that we, maybe our dad or someone told us that this is who we need to be, right? And that's just general. That's across the board. It's not even just a Black woman thing. You know what I mean? So, you have to get real with yourself about, like, what it is that you want. And I think when you begin to really start, like I said, chipping away at some of those hard edges and removing some of those layers, you get to the core of you, and that core of you is woman, right? That core of you is the thing that brings forth life. It's that beautiful nurturing essence, that that beautiful nurturing being that God created you to be. And that right there, like, she's soft, you know what I mean? She wants to own the bakery, you know what I mean, or whatever. Maybe she does want to have this high powered career, but she does it with so much grace because she's not coming from a painful place of needing to prove anything to anyone. She's just woman. She's just being all that God created her to be, right? And so when I think about my, motherhood for me, first off, I'll say this, motherhood isn't my identity, and I know that sounds a bit radical, and you may think, what, are you negligent? Absolutely not. I absolutely love my child. I want more children, and I mother those within the community. You know what I mean? I'm here nurturing, educating y'all, so I absolutely love this, being this light bearer, this thing that brings forth life. It's not anything that I take for granted, and I'm nurturing something every day, all day, and so when I think about my motherhood, like I said, I did the work. So I'm at a point in my life where I'm walking with God, and so motherhood for me, God has given me so much grace, right? So let me just say that I did things God's way, I guess you could say. So I'm very graced for motherhood. I know that it was something that I would be. I didn't think that it would result in, single motherhood. But I was graced for motherhood. And I think that's why, you guys, I made that post in the community section on my YouTube channel, just saying like, hey, the reality is that there are a lot of women who are the spokespersons for motherhood who never wanted to be mothers. They just kind of, made choices out of obligation. Like we talked about having a certain type of lifestyle, and it's really just out of obligation, out of this forcefulness, this sense of push and pull, right? I need to prove something, this really hard place of expectation, rather than being, rather than, hey, like this is exactly what is for me. This is what was destined for me. This is what I want, for myself. And the reality is that that's just not something that, a lot of women can speak to. And so, I would actually say for those who are listening who don't have children, make sure children are something that you want. You know what I mean? Like if you don't have that desire to be a mother, don't. You're going to be a terrible mom. You know what I mean? You'll be a terrible mom. But the reality, is that for a lot of us women, the idea of being child free is really just self-protection. It's saying, wow, these are my potential partners, right? I'm in this field. I'm in the urban community. Hello, and these are the mates that I have to choose from. And they're dealing with all type of psychological disorders, right? They are not a safe space. They are a presence that brings about harm and humiliation. Then absolutely you're going to opt in for child free. And it just so happens that right now it's a movement for it, but for a lot of women, I do believe women are being tricked out of their biological desires to parent and to mother because of pain. That's the thing about life. You can't escape yourself. If you are someone who you just have not done that work. You don't really know who you are. You haven't done that work to heal the things that you've gone through, and to really meet yourself. You know what I mean? Then you're just going to be making choices in your life that are not going to result in you being happy. And it isn't until you really start to figure out who you are and get to that work that you'll unravel that softness and realize that you might have given up something that is so precious. So I think the idea of like single motherhood, like I said, it comes with so many negative connotations, but to be a mother is such a beautiful thing. To be a mother is a beautiful thing. I'm not on here gassing like, things are hard or whatever, but I do want to say that hard doesn't mean it's not beautiful. Hard doesn't mean give up. Hard doesn't mean it's not worth it. Hard doesn't mean that you can't get through it, or, there's no grace. Hard just means this is something new, right? I'm a first time mom. So, hard sometimes just means this is something new. I've never done this before. It's like doing math, you know what I mean? But once you start to get the formulas, once you start to, understand that formulaic, that method, you figure it out, and it's like you start to skate, and you can do the problem that took you, maybe 15 minutes or whatever, and you do it quicker and faster and better and more efficient. And, before you know it, you're passing with flying colors, you know what I mean? And so I just think that to be a woman is such a transformative experience. It really is. I think walking with God is a transformative experience. And I just think we're blessed. And I just think for me, you're talking about something so sacred, raising up a human being. It's just not anything that I take for granted. And it's nothing that anyone could demean, and could degrade in my life. And quite frankly, I would encourage Black women to, there gets to a certain point where we can acknowledge the violence that a lot of males commit, in our lives and, communally. But that does get to a certain point when you have to start to enact a sense of self-protection. Perhaps that does look like mothering yourself, right? For so many of us, let's just be honest, man, like, we don't protect Black girls. You know what I mean? We don't protect Black women. We don't protect Black girls. We just kind of are left to fend for ourselves as Black girls. You know what I mean? Black girls are kind of raised to be like these pit bull puppies, to just really, have to defend themselves. There's not a lot of people who are out on the front lines protecting them. I know for me, that wasn't the case. I had to be really hard and really rough, rugged. And, it got to a point where I started to question, like, who am I? Who am I? Because I know I'm not this pretty gangster. You know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, I'm Black. Now I'm Black, and yeah, maybe that might be a bit more of a stereotype, but hey, listen, you know what I mean? That's real. But at the end of the day, it's like, I'm so much more than that. Like, I'm a woman, at the end of the day, I'm a woman and I deserve to be protected. And so, God is my protector. Let me just say that. And he's the best protector, because he sees all and he knows all, you know what I mean? Your man got a blind spot. Okay. But I just think, getting with God and allowing God to kind of just tailor your journey is beautiful. And I encourage women to just kind of start with like 31 days of prayer. I know that kind of sounds like I'm about to sell you a DVD, but I'm serious, because I think prayer changes your life. Prayer introduces you to God in your own personal way. You see what I'm saying? Like, I think sometimes when we say get with God, people go right to religion. And then at this point, you're in so deep, that you're unhappy. You're not being real with yourself. And you don't even know who you are, but you're just doing what you feel like is expected of you. And that's very inauthentic, and God can't bless that, as someone who kind of did things the right way, right? Relationally, I realized that like, that was just my journey, because let me just say this, I always had my own relationship with God, but I felt like, coming into contact with those of a religious community, one, I wanted to go deeper in the things of God. I love God. You know what I mean? I wanted to go deeper in the things of God. And so I felt like, they were telling me, oh, it need to look like this. It need to be like this. You need to stop doing X, Y, and Z. And so I kind of just fast track my journey, right? I think that's what religion does sometimes, is it makes us think if we can just shape ourselves to be perfectly presenting, perfectly whole, perfectly whatever we're trying to project, that God will bless us quicker. God will bless us faster. Our lives will reflect God's glory, today, when the reality is that, it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime. I look back and I'm not who I was at 21, but here I am right now today. And it's like, I know this is exactly who God created me to be. And it's not by my own effort. I wasn't out here trying to be a saint. I was living my life as a 21-year-old girl, and I should have been. Okay. Rightfully so. Okay. That's my business. Okay. And, and so fast forward, and it's like God has done such a work on me, all because I said yes. I was a young girl praying to God. I knew about God. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I just knew he was real. You know what I mean? I knew he kept me, and I look back and I'm amazed at what he's done in me. Right. And that's how God gets the glory. It's in us having a willingness to be a vessel and to yield to the calling of God, to answer the phone when he's calling you. That's how he gets the glory. It's not a matter of us trying to shape up and make it look perfect and do all these things, because honestly, that's how you get it wrong. Right? Like, just a little testimonial, I got married because I felt like that was God's will for me. You see what I'm saying? Like, being in that church community, et cetera, kind of letting these people get to me, right? Instead of letting God just being prayerful, just being watchful, just allowing him to prune things in me, right? I wanted to fast track it. These people told me I needed to fast track it. How I needed to live my life was not the way I needed to live my life. Okay. And so I fast tracked it. And, you're in the church community, that's all they talk about is wives and husbands. They don't talk about purpose. They don't talk about anything outside of you being married. Right. And so I felt like God's will was for me to get married. I thought that was it, but I got married, and I realized not only, does God not promise us a blessed marriage? Okay. He never promised us a miracle if we did things the right way. Okay. He could do that, but he didn't promise that though. That's not in his word. He didn't promise you to have a blessed marriage. He didn't say that, so he didn't promise that. And, just kind of realizing, like, just because you do things the right way doesn't mean that you're more holy than the next person. Doesn't mean that you're going to be happier than the next person. Joy is something that is accessible to all of us at all times of day, because we have the Holy Spirit, we have God. But at the end of the day, it's like, no, you know what I mean? Like, you try to do things the right way and the perfect way as a woman, especially when you come into the church community, you're vulnerable, you're wanting a partner, you're thinking this is the right way because that's what they tell you that this is the right way. But you're going to find yourself really making a mistake. And let me just say, I'm going to only speak from my experience. Like, I'm not going to tell you that's the wrong thing to do, because I don't know, that might be the right thing for you. But for me, that wasn't the right thing. And so I found myself married, but I knew that this wasn't the end for me. I was not called to just be sitting in the house making pancakes all day. You know what I mean? There was more in me. And I just think, like, if I had got married and stayed married, who knows? That would have been like a spiritual death. Who knows? Because you're in this confinement of like religion, and just, it's horrible, man. It's horrible. And so I'm just saying all that to say, it's like, girl, you got to be who God is calling you to be. And that starts with prayer. Take your time. If you don't know the Lord, take your time getting to know him. You know what I mean? Take your time. He will reveal himself. If you don't believe that he real, just be like, Jesus, show me that you're real, and watch he show you. And you better trust the sign. Now, you're a baby. If you still growing in your relationship with God, he gonna give you some signs and wonders. But you get a little older now, girl, it's like, I ain't showing you now. You gotta walk it out. But Yeah, and so just kind of wrapping up, my philosophy is that, one, let me say this too. I want to give a little bit of disclosure because I made a video and I was talking about motherhood and Mother's Day and so forth. And I don't want to be insensitive to the women who share their struggles, whose stories may be different than mine, whose circumstances may be different than mine, whose psychology may be different than mine. You know what I mean? I don't want to say psychology, but I'll say like philosophy, I don't want to be insensitive to the real struggles of motherhood, and the real circumstances, right? The external factors that can make your motherhood journey feel more burdensome than blissful. You know what I mean? Feel more burdensome than blessed, right? I don't want to be insensitive to that. So let me just say that. But I did have my child a little bit older, not in my 30s, but in my late 20s. I did have my child a little bit older. So by me having my daughter a little bit older, I was a lot more mature. You see what I'm saying? I think sometimes for a lot of us, unfortunately, things happen, and the journey looks different. And I think having children before you're mentally ready, right? Before you have the wisdom, and you could pray for wisdom because that's the thing that's accessible. Like, I'm young, but I sound old, but I'm really young, but I believe that plays a huge role. So if you're not a mother and you're listening to this and you want to be a mom, wait until you're mentally ready. And when I say mentally ready, I mean like you've been through some stuff, so you're kind of strong. You know what I mean? Like, you're mentally strong, you're adaptable, you're flexible, you know how to survive. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, because things happen, things come up. For example, if you got to pay a bill and you don't have the money to pay the bill, but you don't want the lights being cut off. Like, you know how to flex it and be like, let me call and cancel the auto insurance, or let me put this on hold, if like, you know what I mean? Like, seriously. And I'm not just talking about struggle, but I'm also being real, because I know that that's like a real circumstance, like that happened to me. But it's like, you don't have that flexibility of like being a survivalist when you're in your early 20s, because everything is so new. Your early 20s is an era where, and this is for my youngins listening to this, okay, this part is for you. Your early 20s is for you to build the skills to be like strong and to be independent, so don't feel bad if you're not in that space, and don't feel bad if you already had your child and you're in that space. That just means they're gonna be coming along with you, okay, period. But I do believe that played a huge role. That plays a huge role in my parenting, because my circumstances may be similar to everybody else, right? Like I said, I'm a single mom, but at the end of the day, it's like mentally it's different. Mentally it's different because I'm much more mature. I've been through some things. You know what I mean? Girl, you go through the fire, you come out, God ain't let you get burned. You be like, all right, you know what I mean? This ain't nothing. This is cake. Some days it ain't cake, but it's like, okay, learning your kid, being with your baby. You learn the cries and the coos and the da-da-da-da. You know what I mean? It like I said, it starts hard because it's new, but like it gets easier as you learn your child and you figure things out, So I'm saying all that to say, it's your perspective. It's your perspective that's going to have the biggest impact on your experiences, not just in motherhood, but in life. That's the biggest thing. And that's why I do believe in the power of like renewing your mind, to think positively. And I tell you guys all the time, this is why I don't really go viral. I don't want to go viral because I'm constantly growing. I would hate to be misconstrued or misunderstood with something that I said, when I was in a season. Renaissance Room, we're growing and evolving together. You know what I mean? And it's a beautiful thing. And so I really do have to just give so much credit to God. And I think, my words are failing me as I'm trying to teach God and share God with y'all, because I believe God is an experience, and I've been saying that since day one. You know what I mean? I believe God is an experience. The Bible even tells us like not every one of us should become teachers, and so I don't have a desire to be a high priest or to be an apostle or prophet or whatever the case may be, but I know God is real. I know God has given me gifts, and I know He has given me grace and mercy over my life, but also motherhood. So just understand that like your child is a blessing. It really is. I couldn't imagine my life without being a mother. You know what I mean? I know I made my mistakes, and the choices that I made were mine that I made. Those were mistakes I made, but like, and the lessons that I've learned. But at the end of the day, man, like I knew I wanted to be a mother. I knew that for me, I couldn't live my life without being a mom. Never having experience giving birth and never having experienced, having children. And I don't mean to say that to, contrast anyone who's struggling with fertility. I'm saying that to say, like, if you are a woman and you have the deliberate choice to be a mom, I mean, it's amazing. You know what I mean? It really is. And so I think you have the stigma, right, of like single motherhood. It's a lot of people who are outside of the club, and I think if more men and women of single mothers spoke more about the beautiful things that their mother was able to do and give them, I think that would help a lot of people. That would actually heal communities. That's why I tell you guys all the time, like, I don't mean to critique Black culture from this like conservative standpoint, but I'm at a point in my life where I just realized, like, as someone who's done the work of advocacy, the end road is nothing. At the end of the road, it's nothing. It's nothing. Like, because there's no solutions. We're not talking about solutions. We're not talking about the very real practical things. And most importantly, from a psychological perspective, there's too many of us who are bound, to ever really have change or to ever really have or bring about a sense of revolt, and so that's just the truth. Right now, the values, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said it like that, but right now the values have been and will always be materialism, and unfortunately, within American society, sometimes to go about acquiring materialism and to be, a person who possesses a sense of character that is a bit more flamboyant and, so forth, it comes with this personality that is a little narcissistic. It comes with this personality that's willing to step over whoever, right? Hurt whoever, right? You talk about celebrities and rappers, look at all the people that they're hurting. I was walking downtown one day, this is a few years ago, little girl, maybe 14, 16, 15, no older than 16, maybe less than that, walking down the short streets, these really, really shorts on, just showing everything in front of all these nasty men. She don't even know no better. You see what I'm saying? Like, and this is the byproduct of those who stand at the top of the pinnacle, right? The Black community, the celebrities who promote this type of music. Like, that's the real byproduct of the impact and the effects that they have, the hypersexualization of young Black girls and the continuum, right, of the stereotypes of the hypersexualization of the young Black girls, right, to really say, hey, listen, when we commit sexual violence against Black bodies and Black women's bodies specifically, we can justify it and say they wanted it, right? Look at them. They're lewd. Look at their behavior. You see what I'm saying? And so when, you're looking online and all these young girls are coming up missing and sextortion and, sex trafficking and all these things are becoming so normalized, is like, yeah, it's a byproduct of that. You see what I'm saying? Like, people prey on vulnerable communities, specifically the Black community. You see what I'm saying? And there's no one here to do the work to say, let's find these missing girls. There's no one there. There's no justice, right? And so this is why I always say advocacy needs a reform, because when you're living in the community and you're seeing it, you understand that, like, much of what people talking about is just fluff at the end of the day. We got bigger problems than racism. And I'm gonna stand on that. Okay. Since I got my mind right, all right, since I started seeing things from a different lens, okay, we got bigger issues than race and racism. And the sad thing is, so many of us can't even see our world outside of that. I just had an experience recently. I was at a store. I was trying to make a return from one of my daughter's dresses, and Black woman just completely discriminated against me. You know what I mean? I know I wasn't looking up to par. And that's another thing, right? You wonder why our focus is on materialism, because we don't get no respect and no dignity without it. You ain't going to, the kids ain't going to respect me if I'm pulling up in my little, I ain't going to say slider. It's not a slider. Right? It's not a slider. We've done some things. We're doing all right for ourselves, right? Like, humbly, it's not a slider, but it's like, kids aren't going to respect me unless I'm pulling up in that GLE. You know what I mean? Unless I'm pulling up in the Louis scarf and I'm, you know what I mean? But if I come and I'm just talking to the kids, they're not hearing me. You see what I'm saying? And so, unfortunately, for so many of us, you can't even blame materialism as being the most prized possession, because many of us aren't even seen or given basic respect and dignity without it. So it's a shame in itself. But I've always questioned if Black people were connected spiritually. Because I don't remember too many instances. White people being racist, because this is just expected. You expect white Americans to be racist towards you. Like, you already know that's coming. You know what I mean? But when it's Black people, when Black people start discriminating against you, that's painful. That really stung. That really kind of bothered me a little bit for my day. That bothered me throughout my day. I was kind of stuck on that moment. And that's why, I just say, like, advocacy needs a reform, because at this point, what are we talking about? What are we talking about? And so it's unfortunate, because that's another thing. You're talking about lack of evolution psychology, and I'm gonna wrap up here, but instead of seeing ourselves holistically and witnessing situations and how we view the world from a holistic standpoint, we're so confined by race, right? We say, oh, they was being discriminated towards me or whatever, when the whole time you might have been showing up looking crazy or acting crazy, so we never really get to grow from these things. But at the end of the day, to be a mother is an amazing thing. I know you got something from this. I'm gonna wrap up, because I just we veering all over the place. It's been 40 minutes I've been on here, but I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.